Hello everyone. Now you will hear a brief retelling of the movie The Unforgivable. Enjoy the movie. Ruth Slater is released from prison after 20 years in prison for a serious crime. The woman was met by her guardian Vincent and told her what she should not do if she does not want to go to jail again. It's important that she doesn't touch her victim's family, or a lot of people have a guilty conscience. Ruth is looking for a man, based on an old photograph. Vincent offered to help her get a job at the fish factory if another job didn't work out. At the same time, a young girl, Catherine, dozed off at the wheel and had an accident. Her foster parents came to the hospital and offered her a place to stay until she was fully recovered. Vincent dropped Ruth off in Chinatown, near a dormitory where the scum of the earth live. The woman would have to live with 3 shabby roommates. Even a prison cell was freer. Ruth's stalker turns out to be the son of the man who nailed her. He asks his brother what they should do. Perhaps they should take a couple of baseball bats and punish the criminal, but Steve asks his older brother to be quiet. Mrs. Malcolm suspects that her daughter may have had an accident because of stress, because on the same day her older sister was released from prison and the girl could have found a letter from her. The couple hope that the woman will not look for a relative, because she is forbidden to do so. Ruth was called to the phone, and at the other end a stranger said, "Cop killer." When she returned, she saw a woman rummaging through her things, for which she was immediately punished. The junkie crumpled the only photo of her little sister. Keith lives with his seriously ill mother, and Steve has a wife and young son. Ruth recalls how it all happened. She and her sister were about to be evicted from the house. A sheriff came into the dwelling and a woman shot him with a shotgun. Another family lives in the house now. A laborer found old little shoes in the wall. Ruth is weaned from being among people, the more she has a hard time in noisy, crowded New York. The woman hoped to get a job as a welder, but she was immediately rejected for obvious reasons. So Ruth had to go to work at a fish factory, where it is dangerous, hard, and very smelly. Almost everyone who works there is a migrant or ex-con. A co-worker, Blake, offered to give Ruth a ride home, but she ignored the offer. It only takes 10 minutes to shower in the dorms, and then the next madam comes barging in. Ruth went to the library to use the internet to find her sister. She scrolled through the search engine and the adoption database to find pictures of herself and learned that the house had been sold. Lise tensed when she saw a stranger in the yard staring in their direction. Ruth recalls that the sheriff was a friend of her father's and offered to let the sisters stay with him temporarily. He wanted to settle things peacefully, unlike a bunch of thugs who were going to kick down the door. John came up to Ruth to say hello, and she lied that she was doing repairs on their house. The man invited Ruth in. She remembered well how she and her sister had lived here and how the sheriff had been shot. Hearing the children's voices, Ruth panicked and walked away. John offered her a ride into town. Ruth learned that the man was a lawyer, and she was looking for a family law specialist. John suggested that the woman stop lying and tell him what was wrong. Ruth confesses that after her parents died, they lived in that house with her sister, and when she went to prison, she wrote to Kate all the time, but never got a reply. Now she wanted to meet her. John is touched by her story and offers his help. Kate has insomnia, but she refuses to take her pills, which prevents her from playing the piano. A girl is haunted by nightmares from her childhood. She remembers that there was a woman around, but she doesn't know who she was. Ruth is interested in construction work, but since she can't get a job anywhere, she takes a job doing repairs at a community center for the homeless, even though she will be paid the minimum wage. Now she has 2 jobs. Vincent insists the woman confess to her boss that she's been in jail. Cop killer is a label that will hang over her for the rest of her life. At the fish factory, Ruth crosses paths with Blake, and the next time she agrees to get in his car. The man was surprised when Ruth landed in some ghetto, now not only a second job but a new home. Ruth has moved her things here, though now Keith knows where she can be found. Ruth heard a noise and, armed with a crescent wrench, started downstairs. She almost nailed Blake, who just wanted to give her a donut. Blake also brought a warm jacket because hers was all worn out. Ruth can't believe someone decided to take care of her. Embarrassed, Blake apologized for scaring her and left immediately. John finds out exactly what Ruth is in jail for and stops picking up the phone. The woman leaves him a message every day begging for help. Liz finally learns from the worker who the stranger was and what she has done. Steve's wife is having fun with his brother. A cop he knows tells him that Keith keeps sniffing around where Ruth lives and works, so he decides to talk to Keith. The brothers were also left without a home because their mother drank herself to death after their father died. The older brother has a much better memory of how horrible it was. The killer is now getting high on freedom. Steve also has second thoughts about the place. Lisa reprimands her husband for letting a criminal into their home. The lawyer took her case after all, and the wife insisted that Ruth never come near their doorstep again. Steve went to check on his mother for the first time in a long time, but she turned her back on him. He looked at his and his father's wedding picture. Now Steve had come to see the man who had destroyed their family. He pretended to be a construction worker to get in. Ruth noticed that the stranger was acting strangely, so she asked him to leave the room, but Steve only pretended to leave and waited until he was alone to go through Ruth's things. He found an old picture of Kate and another letter she had written to her sister. Steve took a picture of the girl. Vincent learned that Ruth had hired a lawyer and asked her to put the idea of finding her sister out of her mind. She's a stranger to her now. Maybe the girl is afraid of her, so she never answered. That evening after her shift, Ruth invited Blake over to her place. They're bonding. Mr. Malcolm gets a letter from Ruth's lawyer, which shocks him and his wife. Steve tells his brother that he talked to Ruth, she's great and it's not fair, but Keith's plan is bad. The criminal has a sister and they will repay her in the same coin. Unlike Ruth, who doesn't like him, Blake is a nice guy and is friends with a lot of people and basically enjoys every little thing. Ruth realized it was time for Blake to learn the truth about her. 20 years for the willful murder of a sheriff, the revelation roused the man, and he went quiet and didn't even stop Ruth when she was about to leave. The woman almost cried, but has always kept her emotions to herself. Unlike his wife, Mr. Malcolm is calm. If Ruth goes near her sister, she'll go straight to jail. She will definitely not bring anything good into Kate's life, at least that's what the man thinks, but Mrs. Malcolm wants to give the woman a second chance. At least they should talk to her. The conversation is overheard by their own daughter Emily. At the fish factory, Ruth is attacked and brutally beaten by another worker. Her father's a cop, and this is how she decided to get revenge on a cop killer. Ruth suspects it was Blake who told everyone about her. During the fight, Ruth's cell phone gets wet and doesn't work anymore. She refuses to talk to Blake and demands that he get away from her. Ruth meets with Vincent every week at the same time. Lawyer John asks to be told that Kate's foster parents have agreed to the meeting, so Ruth needs to clean up her act. The Malcolms were taking Kate to rehearsal. She couldn't get the shaved memory of a long time ago out of her head. As best she can, Ruth covers up the beatings and goes to meet Kate's foster parents. Mr. Malcolm assures that the girl has a stable life and a promising future, so it's not worth the risk of ruining it all, especially Kate does not remember her older sister. Ruth is angry. She raised the girl from birth because her mother died in childbirth and her father was an alcoholic. For 20 years she wrote thousands of letters. What did they do to them, burned them, or just tore them up? Ruth chased after the couple, demanding to be allowed to see her sister. The lawyer can't help Ruth anymore, and the very letters Emily found and started reading one by one. Ruth became mad with anger and helplessness and began to destroy the community center. All of which she did with her own hands. Blake finally got her to listen to him. Thing is, he was in and out of prison a year and a half ago. They're both on parole, so even just talking to each other puts them at risk of going back to prison. And he didn't spread rumors about her. Blake apologized again for his reaction at the cafe and walked away. That evening, our heroine received a call from Emily and Ruth asked to see her. The woman continues to be followed by Steve. Emily skips school to meet Ruth. In the park, the girl says that Kate doesn't know anything about her, but remembers something sometimes. Emily leaves and tells her where Kate's rehearsal will be today. Ruth will be able to see her sister. Steve follows Emily and finds out where she lives. His son was hysterical at home, and his wife was having fun with her brother in the next room. Steve carefully put the baby in the crib and beat his brother, while his wife covered herself with the infant so he wouldn't do anything to her. At his mother's house, Steve found his father's old gun. To make things right, Ruth first wanted to see a lawyer, but he wasn't at work, so she drove back to her old house. John wasn't home either, so Ruth asked Lisa to come out. The woman recalls how after killing the sheriff she stole a car. Unlike her husband, Lisa doesn't see Ruth as someone who deserves a second chance. She thinks the criminal got what she deserved, but her tears moved her and she let Ruth tell her what really happened. When the door to the house was about to be kicked in, Ruth threatened over the phone to pick up a gun, but it was grabbed by little Kate, who heard the sheriff coming through the other door. She killed the man then. After learning the truth, Fox decided to help the poor woman. Kate's kickback caused her to break her nose. Her older sister brought her to a roadside cafe. That's when they saw each other for the last time. Before turning herself in to the police, Ruth told her little sister that she would always love her no matter what. Ruth was near the Philharmonic when Steve called and said he was holding a gun to Kate's head. A woman's moans came from the phone, and the man gave her the address where she would be arriving. Ruth again asked Liz to give her a ride. Steve is holding a hostage in one of the buildings near the quarry. Liz, recognizing what had happened, immediately called the police. The kidnapper ordered Ruth into the gray building. He pointed a gun at the bound girl, but it wasn't Kate, it was her sister Emily. Steve had gotten the girls mixed up. Kate showed up for rehearsal as she was supposed to. The perpetrator ordered the woman to lie on the floor. He is going to nail the girl in front of Ruth. She guesses who is standing in front of her and what his motive is. Ruth remembers the sheriff talking about his sons that day. They had to give up their bedroom to the sisters so they could live in their house. He was a kind man. Ruth convinces Steve that it won't get any easier. He'll have to leave everything he loves. The man cried and collapsed to the floor, but never let go of the gun. At that moment, a SWAT team surrounded the building. Ruth helped Emily up and covered her with her body. The girl went outside. 20 years ago, before surrendering to the police, Ruth had turned her sister away from the window so she wouldn't see her being arrested. Now she came out again with her hands up. Steve didn't shoot her. They were both rolled up and handcuffed. Vincent arrived and asked the cops to let Ruth go. Nearby, Malcolm's wife and her younger sister were standing by the ambulance. Vincent nodded to Ruth. Kate walked toward her sister and hugged her. Finally, after 20 years, they met again.